He was the face of unstoppable justice, the voice behind some of the most powerful scenes in film history. But when Liam Neeson received one final offer, an action epic meant to crown his legacy, he said no. Instead, he vanished from Hollywood and chose something no one expected. In this story, you'll discover the moment that changed him forever. The secret promise he made after the love of his life was taken away. And how one quiet decision became the most powerful mission of his entire career. Stay with us until the end, because what Liam Neeson did in silence will leave you speechless. There are places on this earth that shape a man before he even knows who he is. Ballymena, Northern Ireland, was that kind of place. A quiet town, often wrapped in rain and routine, but beneath the calm lay decades of tension, of division, of sacrifice, of silence held too long. It was here, in a modest brick house with no television and only a coal stove for warmth, that Liam John Neeson opened his eyes to the world. He wasn't born into privilege, not even comfort. His mother was a cook, his father a caretaker at a Catholic boys' school. They worked long hours, barely spoke of dreams, and didn't have time for indulgence. But there was something in the air Liam breathed, something unspoken, a presence of expectation, the kind that presses down on a boy's shoulders even when he's just learning to tie his shoes. As a child, Liam was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that hides fear, but the kind that listens, watches, absorbs. He saw his mother carry the weight of 10 men without ever once calling it unfair. He saw his father come home every evening, smelling of chalk and old books, tired but dignified. And he saw the way people in his neighborhood wore pain like a second skin. They didn't talk about it. They endured it. That was the first lesson he learned. Survival doesn't always scream. It sometimes just keeps walking. At age 9, Liam discovered boxing, not because he liked fighting, but because he wanted to prove something. To whom he didn't know, maybe to his father, maybe to the walls of that tiny house, maybe to God. He trained until his knuckles bled and returned home each night with bruises he never complained about. There was something cathartic about the discipline, the silence between each punch, the way the world vanished when the bell rang. But even then, the ring wasn't enough. Something inside him needed more. And it wasn't fame, it wasn't applause, it was voice. He found it, unexpectedly, on a dim stage at school. The role was minor, barely a few lines, but the moment the spotlight hit him, something shifted. The crowd was small, the applause polite, but he felt it, not on his skin, in his bones. The sensation that, for the first time, he wasn't pretending to be someone else. He was finally showing who he was. It scared him, and he never told anyone. The years went on. He enrolled at Queen's University Belfast, studying physics of all things. But the classroom was too tight, too calculated, too full of right answers and not enough questions. He dropped out, not because he was lost, but because he knew exactly what he wasn't meant to be. He took odd jobs: forklift driver, teacher in training. He even considered becoming a professional boxer, but life had other plans. One night, a friend convinced him to audition for the Lyric Players Theatre in Belfast. He went, not because he thought he'd get the role, but because something inside whispered that he had to go. That whisper would become a roar. He got in. It wasn't glamour. It wasn't red carpets. It was sweat, long rehearsals, and forgotten lines. But it was art. It was breath, and it was his. He played Shakespeare O'Casey Sing. His voice, once buried under layers of silence, started to rise, deep, thunderous, commanding. He didn't just speak on stage, he transformed. Still, outside the theatre, the world was burning. Northern Ireland in the 1970s was not a place for dreamers. Violence was a daily shadow. Liam saw neighbors disappear. He heard bombs in the distance while walking home. He once passed the scene of an explosion minutes after it tore through the street. There was blood, glass, screams, but more than anything, there was silence, the kind that swallows whole generations. He never talked about those nights. He never used them for sympathy, but they shaped him. They taught him something no acting class ever could: how to carry pain without collapsing, how to keep walking when the world forgets your name, how to become a man others believe in, even when you're breaking inside. Years later, when asked how he could play characters who stood tall in the face of chaos, Liam didn't speak of technique. He didn't mention method acting. He just said, "I've known fear. I've seen what it does." He didn't elaborate. He never needed to. When he finally left Ireland, it wasn't a grand goodbye. There was no parade, just a man with a suitcase, a purpose, and a fire that hadn't yet found its flame. London, then Hollywood. Each step forward, he carried 1,000 stories that would never be told. And even as his name began to appear in film credits, even as he started walking red carpets, he was still that boy from Ballymena. Quiet, focused, watching. But what no one knew then, what even Liam didn't fully realize, was that all those silent lessons, all those wounds, all those nights boxing ghosts in the dark, were preparing him for something far greater, for a role that would define him, a loss that would almost destroy him, and a resurgence that would silence every critic who ever said, "He's too old now." But everything would change in one single night. When he stepped onto that stage for the very first time, something inside him came alive, and something else inside him quietly died. He didn't know it yet, but that moment was the beginning of a storm. Hollywood is a strange place. It can crown you a king by morning and forget your name by night. When Liam arrived, there were no promises, no guarantees, just auditions, rejections, and late-night questions about whether he had made a mistake leaving the theater behind. But then came a story, unlike anything he had ever read. A true story, a tragedy, a masterpiece. Steven Spielberg was looking for a lead, not a star, a soul. Someone who could carry the weight of history without saying much. Someone who could show pain without a tear, power without screaming. And when Liam Neeson walked into the room, he didn't read lines. He stood there, present, real, unshakable. That's how he became Oscar Schindler. Schindler's List was not just a film. It was an awakening, a moment in cinema when silence spoke louder than gunfire. When Liam stood in the middle of that black and white world, the world stopped to watch. Critics called it the performance of a lifetime, but Liam never spoke about awards or reviews. He said very little, actually, because what do you say after carrying ghosts on your shoulders? But success comes with shadows, and in the years that followed, the world tried to fit him into boxes. The romantic, the villain, the teacher, the king. He played them all. But something in his eyes, something from Ballymena, from Belfast, from backstage stages and broken streets, always slipped through the screen. That something was truth. And then came love. Natasha Richardson. She was light where he was shadow. She spoke freely, laughed loudly, and moved through the world with a kind of grace that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it naturally. They met doing what they both loved, breathing life into fiction. Only this time, what began as a play turned into the most real thing either of them had ever experienced. They married, quietly, beautifully. Their love wasn't loud. It was rooted, strong. They had 2 sons, Michael and Daniel, and for the first time, Liam stopped running, not from roles, but from himself. He found home. The world saw him smile more. He still chose complex characters, but off-screen, he was softer. He took joy in simple things, watching his kids grow, cooking breakfast, listening to jazz while holding Natasha in the kitchen. The man known for intensity had found peace, and for a while, life was kind. But peace never lasts forever. In March of 2009, the phone rang. Natasha had fallen during a skiing lesson in Quebec. At first it seemed minor. She even joked about it, said she was fine. But hours later, she wasn't. Liam flew immediately. When he entered the hospital, doctors pulled him aside. They spoke slowly, clearly, but their words made no sense. Brain trauma, no activity, no recovery. He stood at the doorway of her room, watched machines breathe for her, held her hand, already cold, and remembered the conversation they had once had in passing about life support, about dignity, about love, and about letting go. So he did. He kissed her forehead, whispered something the world would never hear. And then he signed the paper. The next days were a blur, the boys were told. Family flew in, reporters waited outside. But inside that hospital room, there was only stillness and grief, the kind that doesn't scream. It seeps, slowly, like ink on white sheets. He could have quit everything, and no one would have blamed him. Instead, he disappeared. Not physically, but emotionally. He kept working, but his eyes changed, his smile faded, and his voice, once so full, grew quieter. The world thought he was moving on. He wasn't. For months he walked through the motions, read scripts, spoke lines, took interviews, but nothing reached him. Until one day, something did. A role, one he almost turned down. Taken, an action thriller. Not the kind of film you expect from a man grieving, but something about the character, a father on a mission, a man fighting for someone he loved, struck him. The producers were hesitant. He was in his mid-50s, not exactly action hero material by Hollywood standards, but Liam didn't care about standards. He cared about truth, and in that role, he saw a man with nothing left to lose, a man who, like him, had lost everything and would burn the world down to protect what remained. He trained hard. He ran drills, learned tactical fighting, threw punches until his joints screamed. There was anger in his training, grief in every movement. And when the cameras rolled, he didn't act. He released the rage, the pain, the emptiness. Taken was expected to be a modest release. Instead, it became a global phenomenon. Audiences were stunned, not just by the action, but by him. His performance was raw, unfiltered, personal. Men saw strength in his silence. Women saw sorrow in his fire. Critics said it redefined the action genre. It wasn't just a film, it was a resurrection. Liam Neeson, once the dramatic actor, then the grieving father, was reborn as an action legend. At an age when most actors fade, he exploded. He went on to make dozens more. Unknown, The Grey, Non-Stop, Run All Night, Cold Pursuit. Each one filled with car chases, shootouts, impossible odds, and that same quiet fury behind his eyes. People thought he was reinventing himself. He wasn't. He was surviving. Because every scene of vengeance was really about love. Every punch, a memory, every bullet, a prayer. He once said, years later, that acting saved him, that the characters he played kept him from falling into a darkness he couldn't name. He never used the word depression, never claimed victimhood, but those close to him knew. And still, he never missed a day on set. He became the man everyone trusted to carry a story, to deliver a moment that meant something. Because when Liam Neeson said a line, you believed it. Not because of the writing, but because of the weight behind it. The weight of every goodbye he never wanted to say, of every role he didn't take because it reminded him of her, of every silent night when he stared at the ceiling and wondered if his sons would remember the sound of her laugh. But he kept going. Because that's what real strength looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up. Again and again. And as the years passed, his films continued to break records. But behind the numbers, behind the stunts and explosions, was a man still carrying a photo in his wallet. a man who once said, "I talk to her every day." Yet even as the world applauded, he knew his time was running out, not in life, in purpose, because the roles were getting repetitive, the studios louder, the messages emptier, and Liam Neeson had something more to say, something deeper, something final. They told him he was too old for this, that he should stop, retire, fade out, but Liam didn't speak. He simply looked at the floor, then at the lens, and moved forward. What he did next, no one in the room would forget, and it would change everything. In the quiet moments between scenes, in the stillness of early morning before the set came alive, Liam Neeson often sat alone, not with a script, not with a phone, but with something heavier, his thoughts. After decades of becoming other people, he'd begun asking a question few in his industry dared to face. When does a story end? Not the story on screen, but the one that breathes behind the eyes. He had been the hero, the soldier, the father, the avenger. He had fought wolves with his bare hands, hijackers, kidnappers, corrupt officials, drug lords. And with each role, the audience grew. The applause thundered louder, the box office soared. But inside, the fire that once burned with rage was flickering. Not because he was weaker, but because something had shifted. The world he once fought against, on camera and off, had grown louder, more chaotic, more cynical. And Liam? He had begun craving silence again. It wasn't burnout, it was evolution. He started turning down scripts, not because he couldn't run or fight, but because the reasons to do so were fading. Because with each passing year, the roles felt less like truth and more like noise. And he was done with noise. He spoke less in interviews, appeared less on talk shows, but when he did speak, it mattered. He talked about aging, about time, about how, one day, he looked in the mirror and saw not the action star, but the man who had survived every role, every loss, every blow, and was still standing. He spoke of Natasha, of course, always with reverence, with honesty, with pauses that said more than any sentence could. "There's not a day," he once said, "not a moment, where I don't feel her near." But he didn't speak of regret, because he had lived, fully, bravely, and now he was ready to listen. He started traveling again. Not for work, for memory. He returned to Ballymena, walked the streets where he once boxed shadows. He visited the church where he was baptized, stood in front of the school where his father once kept the keys. He even visited the old boxing gym, now closed, the walls stained, the air still thick with the scent of leather and sweat. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, he just stood there and remembered. Later, he flew to Paris, not to film, but to walk the bridges at night, to sit by the Seine and reread the letters Natasha had once written him during long filming months. He carried them in his coat, folded and yellowing, the ink fading but her words permanent. Then came the phone call, a director, a big project, a major studio. One last action epic, explosions, car chases, stunts in 5 countries. They said it would honor his legacy, said it would be his swan song. A retirement tour in film form. He declined, respectfully, firmly, because Liam Neeson already knew what his final mission was, and it wouldn't be shot with IMAX cameras or drones. It wouldn't need stunt doubles or slow motion. It wouldn't be scripted. It would be quiet. His last mission was to return, not to the screen, to himself. He began mentoring young actors, quietly, privately, no interviews, no public workshops, just one-on-one sessions in small studios. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions instead of giving answers. And when asked how he prepared for scenes of great pain, he said, "I lived through them. That's the difference." He also spent more time with his sons. Real time, not vacations, not posed moments for cameras, but late-night dinners, long walks, silence shared between men who had grown through fire. They told him he had given them strength. He told them, "You gave me reason." he returned to the theatre once, not to perform, to sit in the back row of a small production in Dublin. He watched a young actor stumble nervously through a monologue, and he smiled, because once that was him. And somewhere along the line, someone had believed in him. That's all he ever wanted to be now, for someone else. No grand finale, just presence. But life, of course, had one final surprise. It came not in the form of a film or an award, but a letter from the mother of a soldier who had passed. A soldier who in his final weeks had watched the grey over and over. She said her son saw in Liam the courage he needed, that the film gave him peace, that he wrote in his journal, "If he can keep walking, so can I." Liam read the letter in his garden, then folded it and placed it next to Natasha's. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because in that moment he understood something no role had ever taught him. Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's what we ignite in others. And in that moment, Liam Neeson, boxer, actor, father, husband, legend, realized something profound. His story was never about revenge. It was always about love. And now, he was ready to stop running, ready to stop performing, ready to be still. And so he walked away, not from fame, but from pretending. And in doing so, he gave us one final gift. The truth of a man who never needed to speak loudly to be heard. The calm after the storm, the strength in surrender, the mission fulfilled. In his final scene, there was no script, no director, no cut. Just Liam Neeson standing beneath a sky full of stars, whispering goodbye to a world that still refused to let him go. And somewhere in the silence, you could still hear him walking. If this story moved you the way it moved us, leave a comment below and tell us what part of Liam's journey touched your heart the most. And if you believe the world still needs stories of quiet strength, of men who carry pain with grace and walk away not for applause, but for peace, then share this video with someone who grew up watching Liam Neeson. And of course, subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you real or inspired stories that honor those who shape generations. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop walking forward.